Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending upon where you are in the world, and welcome to today's webinar, Advanced Self-Service Master Data Improvement, hosted by SAP Insider and presented by Verdantis, Inc. I'm Steve Paul, and I'm your moderator today. We have just a few announcements before we begin. You may maximize and minimize all elements of your console, from the slide area to the speaker bio, Q&A, and resource box by clicking on the blue or green icons in the upper right-hand corner of each box. If you do minimize an element and want to see it again, just click on the icon running across the bottom of our console. This webinar is designed to be interactive between you and our presenter, and later in the program we will ask for your feedback. You can participate in our Q&A session by asking questions about the information presented in this webinar at any time. Just type your question into the Q&A text box located below the speaker bios on the left, and then click the Submit button. We'll answer as many questions as time permits after our presentation. You may enlarge the slide window at any time by clicking on the green icon in the upper right-hand corner of the slide area. Slides will advance automatically throughout the event. And you can also download a copy of our presentation by clicking in the resource box in the bottom left of our console. At this time, we recommend you disable your pop-up blockers. If you're experiencing any technical problems, please visit our webinar help guide by clicking on the Help ? Icon in the bottom right of our console. And if slides are not advancing, please press the F5 key on your keyboard to refresh your console. And now on to our presentation, Advanced Self-Service Master Data Improvement. Discussing today's topic will be Arthur Raguette, Executive Vice President with Verdantis, Inc. Over to you, Arthur.
Well, Steve, thank you very much. And certainly thank you to everyone who's joining us on today's session. Today our goal is to really learn from some best practices to allow organizations to improve the quality of their master data and do it with minimal or almost no outside assistance, to leverage the internal knowledge that an organization has, to leverage the robust processes in order to standardize, normalize, rationalize, attribute, and enrich different kinds of master data using embedded knowledge from within the organization, and improve these different kind of master data domains, leveraging perhaps technology solutions that can capture and improve upon the core assets within an organization. Ultimately, this is about leveraging two things. The teams that each of you have at your disposal. You're either members of teams or you're leading teams that are focused on master data quality improvement. The second is leveraging really the investment that you've already made in your core technology platforms. Oftentimes, there are limitations to getting maximum value out of core systems because the core elements, the master data within them, doesn't quite reach the quality goals that you might have had in mind. Now, when we say best practices, a lot of folks may say, well, best practices, that's whatever a vendor tells us to do or an advisor tells us to do. When we look at best practices, we're really looking at best practices from our customers over the last 10 years. Well over 100 million supplier, customer, product, material master records have been processed from companies that are generally in the Global 1000, typically multinational, oftentimes multilingual, with about half of our experience and the best practices gleaned coming from North America and about 25% coming from Europe, the balance coming from South America or from Asia-Pac and Middle East. Further to that, different industries have different requirements. We'll see a different kind of mix in terms of the systems that are deployed. Yes, of course, they're SAP-centric. We're obviously here together because of that. But we'll often see additional heterogeneous systems that may have a specific transactional requirement or significant impact on productivity in terms of manufacturing or process. And across these multiple industries, they have different emphasis on different master domains, whether it be customer, supplier, material, product, as well as the somewhat smaller employee, plant, and the like. And they're driven by different motivations. Fundamentally, they all have the same requirement to improve the quality of their master data. But what drives that sometimes is simply an SAP upgrade. Now is the right time. We know that we've had a data quality gap. We're going to leverage this as an opportunity to go ahead and do it right this time. Other times we're looking at consolidations. We've been running multiple instances, one for APAC, one for South America, one for North America, and we want to combine into a single instance. And to do that, we need to have data that's consistent across the board. But at least they're starting at a good point. Others, and especially given the somewhat rocky economic conditions on a global basis over the last 5 to 10 years, we're seeing a huge increase in post-merger or post-acquisition data consolidations. So in order to really realize the economies of scale that the acquiring company might have expected out of an organization that they purchased, how do we leverage their customer base, their product base, their supply base? How do we bring this information in and get a more unified global view of the greater organization? And then perhaps to a lesser degree, the trend towards creating shared services centers, either for managing asset or managing onboarding a supplier or customer, or creating a common organization for purchasing and managing a supply chain, mandates that there is this rather global multi-business unit view, because these shared service centers become profit centers unto themselves. And what they need is both input data that is consistent, that is normalized, that is standardized, but they also need a level of detail within that data that allows them to act effectively for each of their internal customers and be able to report globally with high level of visibility to management and to internal stakeholders. So from a scale and a scope, this is sort of where we come from in terms of why we see these best practices occurring. Over the past 10 years, we've seen organizations go from sort of outsourcing the solution set, looking for someone else to come in and help them bring their master data quality to the right level. And over the last 3 to 5, the trend has been for those mature, somewhat better practiced organizations to realize that this truly is an asset in and of itself. And they are developing internal teams to manage this process. They know that it is not a one-time job. It is an ongoing task. And those that are growing through the small or medium or large acquisitions know that they need to be able to pull a trigger to affect this kind of action, to renormalize, to standardize, to get more value out of multiple master data sets into a common single master environment for all of the expected benefits, right? ROI of system, maximization of process, increased visibility. So our agenda today, and please, I do want to re-echo what Steve had started off with, which is please feel free to ask questions throughout the session. We'll queue them up, and I'll either break or I'll answer them at the end. We look at a couple of core things. First and foremost is about the process. You've got aspects of data preparation, data cleansing, improving core data quality from a historic legacy information perspective. And then you've got perhaps another process for keeping this data clean in the future. So it's sort of getting it clean and keeping it clean might be one way to look at it. And then there's, I say, process separation and combination, because you need to, I believe, and our customers more importantly believe, that you have to separate those two processes in terms of the teams and resources that you leverage, and yet combine some of the core functionality, because it is identical between those two processes. And we'll touch on that a bit. And then we'll run through some of the other steps. What are the general quality improvement steps that we've seen as best practice adopted across the industries that we've been serving, and how has that helped organizations sort of embed and automate the process of master data enrichment and cleansing to the point where they have become largely very self-sufficient. And then, how do they leverage existing technologies out in the marketplace today to accelerate that and to really sort of concrete that kind of increased value proposition? Because ultimately, it is about being able to increase team productivity and increase value derived from information systems. So we talk about process separation. You've got the data preparation phase. Take a scenario, you've recently acquired or merged with another organization, and you need to bring in all of the common master domains versus the keeping it clean over time. Once you've established a steady state in a clean target system, you're going to get new requests, new suppliers, new customers, new product, new material, new facilities, new plants. They're going to be added over time. What is the real difference between these two? And fundamentally, it gets down to the teams that are often used or deployed to support these efforts. If you look at the sort of get it clean, either as a result of a merger or an upgrade or just, hey, this is the right thing to do, which is oftentimes very hard to get funding for, it's typically been historically a external service provider that will come in and help with the data enrichment or the data matching and provide some core baseline functionality. When we look at the ongoing basis, which is how do we go ahead and control processes for new additions? How do we ensure that there are no new duplicate data items being entered? How do you route new requests throughout the organization? I think historically, this has been done through forms or it's been done through email collaboration across multifunctional teams. Both of these processes are still very team intensive. In one example, it's folks who know the domain, in the case of Get It Clean. But then on the Keeping It Clean, it is multifunctional teams with innate or deep process knowledge, and they're somewhat limited by their methods of interaction, methods of communication. So the core sort of team-intensive aspects of this is that these cross-functional and domain folks are consistently being drawn into one process or the other. So by creating your own teams and separating them for the process of data preparation, data normalization, getting the actual master data standardized, normalized, attributed, rationalized, and enriched, leverages more of your domain talent, people who know customers, material, product, versus your ongoing requirements, which tend to be more transactional supporting in nature. It is more sporadic and is, in many ways, best done by creating a small, focused team that is going to worry about the data stewardship, data governance role for an entire organization. And we can certainly have an entirely separate session to talk about whether that should be a centralized team on a global basis or whether these should be regionalized teams across business units, very client-specific. But that requirement is just so separate. So as we look at the teams that are being built, the monetization or the funding for these two efforts, they are almost always fully separated. But now on the flip side, why should these two things be combined? Where do people generally start to see significant similarity between the two? And this gets down to the actual data improvement process. Right? It's less about the team. It's more about the actual data elements being processed, standardized, enriched, and attributed and the like. What we typically have seen is that every project related to improved data quality, whether it's done with an external service provider like ourselves, internally, for instance, with our tools, or simply self-sufficient by a client, is they step through these same 5 basic requirements for data quality improvement. There's the aspect of standardization. So this is assigning common naming conventions, common coding systems, common classifications, for instance. clustering of data. And this assists with the general navigation and reporting, but not necessarily at a detailed level. The next is a level of normalization. So we think in terms of, let's say, address normalization or name normalization. Or if I'm looking down the supply chain, I'm looking at supplier normalization or material or product normalization. Getting things like units of measures to be consistent across all incoming data sets. And then a level of attribution, being able to get a more granular view than a material group code. Getting to that sort of SAP class and characteristic level, that I've got characteristics with characteristic values. And this becomes incredibly important when we start looking at detailed slice and dice capabilities across clusters of information. What is the segment for a customer? What is their size? What is their geography? What products have they bought before? This level of granularity that may or may not be tied within a master record makes a lot of sense. If I'm looking at the goods or the materials that I buy to support my operations, I want to get down to the specific attribute, size, dimension, quality levels of the items that I've bought, so that the standardization gets me to the point of understanding what an item is. Normalizing helps me understand how to name that and refer to it across a global organization. And then the attribution starts to give me the specifics, that deep level of knowledge that makes, in many ways, those elements more actionable, more meaningful throughout my, I'll say, reporting life cycle or my data life cycle across the organization. What rationalization then does is once I've got this level of detail, I now have the ability to more accurately identify, especially in the case of a consolidation or a post-merger activity, what things are the same. What goods are the same, or what customers or what suppliers are the same. Because I've got this enhanced level of detail through the attribution process that my rationalization is now very exact. This gives us all the ability to make those, very smart decisions on what is a duplicate, what is a potential duplicate record, and very quickly get down to accurate counts, right? Accurate count of customers, accurate count of suppliers, or of parts, or of inventory, or assets. And at some point along this process, there'll be a stage where they need to enrich their data. And when I say enrich, the thing that most of us jump to mind is adding a credit rating to a supplier record or to a customer record, validating or enhancing an address location, again, for the same kind of party-level domains. On the product side, it might be adding additional coding that is associated with a distributor or a global distribution network or a healthcare delivery point. But the ability to enrich or to improve your data is something that, because of its time and its cost, you generally want to do after you have deduplicated to a very large extent. Now, we may have talked about sort of the technical processes or steps or stages that every organization goes through, but there's also a more sort of fundamental or almost a more elevated step, which is how does one go about the process of defining a project for material master quality improvement? And again, these are best practices seen from our clients to date. And there are a couple of different ways to look at this. And if I sort of step back to the abstract, first and foremost is defining your scope. What data is going to be processed? What are we looking to accomplish? So it's not just sort of that raw data load, but what is the business scope of the data? What is it actually being used for? What are my source systems? It's very easy if I'm simply merging two SAP instances. If I've got a management execution system, or I've got additional downstream CRM onboarding systems, what exactly are the elements that I'm looking to bring together? So once the data scoping is complete, then we start looking at how to organize that data. If I look at that picture to the right, okay, if I'm looking to get my handle, so to speak, on a bag of rocks or a box of rocks, how do I organize the rocks in the box? I want to categorize or classify rocks. I see rocks that are round. I see rocks that are brown. I see rocks that are gray. How do you want to structure that information? And it's almost always domain specific and to some degree industry or business line specific. but you need to define your core categorization or coding system or taxonomy so that you have a hierarchical way to refer to, in this case, a bunch of rocks. The next is to identify how deep do I want to go. So it's one thing to say I've got a rock and that it's round, but when I say round, is it oval? Is it spherical? Is it egg-shaped? And once I've sort of normalized to how I want to refer to a particular shape of a rock, what are the other attributes or characteristics for a rock? Is it its thickness? If it's spherical, it's obviously its radius or diameter or circumference. You need to preset and to understand going into this that you need to create these templates or definitions for that level of granularity. And that process of initially, scoping and then organizing into a hierarchical, taxonomy or grouping, and then providing this level of attribution and granularity within a formatted data structure is going to give you that atomic information to get more value out of the master data, as well as be able to more quickly and more accurately deduplicate and prevent duplicates in the future as we look at the ongoing sort of keep it clean phase. Once you've defined your data templates and you know what kind of detail you're actually looking for, then the process of getting attribute values and attributes from your source, originating systems becomes much more clear. I'm not saying that it becomes that much easier, but at least it is more defined, and it sets a very positive action plan for extracting or pulling out attributes and attribute values from your existing data, and then normalizing those values so you have consistency across the master data, giving you the ability to rationalize or deduplicate, and then enriching or appending that information. And then with the end state in mind, the ability, of course, to now take that data after it's been enriched, after it's been deduplicated, it's been normalized, it's been structured, and now ensuring that you can output it into a way that can be best leveraged by your target system. So ensure that the output regeneration is consistent, automated, ready for translation, the actual loading of that data, and probably just as important to many of us on the call is establishing a baseline of initial data quality so that you can watch what happens over time. If you cannot prevent, I'll say, data aging or data inaccuracies from being created, at least now you have a baseline starting point to say, okay, our data has been X percentage of accurate. Accurate meaning it has been verified, it has been complete, it has got a 98% complete, all critical fields have been entered and are validated, and the ability to sort of manage data quality and see the results of that are best done at this point, right, before the data has been sort of tarnished or hit with sort of real-world impact. Now, the learning experience that you go through going through this master data cleansing exercise is one that you don't want to have to relive again. I mean, yes, it's valid. It brings a lot of value, into and of itself. But you want to be able to embed this information, to capture it, to be able to use it as just an extension of your corporate, sort of IP assets. And think about how much you've learned as you go through this kind of exercise. So how does somebody go about taking a fairly manual and in conference room intensive kind of process and begin to encapsulate that learning, encapsulate that experience into a common environment, into a toolkit, if you will, that can be reused when and as needed from within? Well, this is a little bit about our journey. Having supported multiple customers in the past across different industries and a fairly broad mix, when we looked at how to take our core technologies and how to take our core sort of implementation practices, which have largely been shaped and expanded by the interactions with our customers, get everybody in a white room, get everybody in a conference room, set up a whiteboard, and start ideating, right? So whether it is stickies on a cork board or whether it's a diagram on a whiteboard or an ER diagram or a mind map, we went through that process of capturing what are the actual best practices, what are the right ways to do this across any given industry, what are specific to a particular industry, what is specific to a domain, what do we do differently in material that you don't have to do in supplier, why is supplier different than customer, how does a finished product need to be represented or across the overall board. And to really drill down to that level of detail for any organization is important, because the end result can be something that is very structured, highly automated, and one that supports the real-world process of data quality improvement over large scale, large amounts of information. So we went through this very similar transformation ourselves. We've basically taken almost 10 years worth of experience and effectively productized that, put that into a common repeatable platform at the request of our customers today. And some of the things that we realized is it's not just about the data quality elements and how one improves the content or the accuracy or the efficacy of the data itself. It's about how do you organize an internal team in the data preparation and the data governance phases to really use your resources effectively. Time and time again, we've seen organizations who have tried on their own to instantiate or to initiate a master data cleansing exercise, and outside of the scope of an acquisition or a significant upgrade or consolidation in their core platforms, these projects are generally unsuccessful, and they're unsuccessful for two reasons. There's certainly the monetize or grabbing the right budget, but the second is rallying the right support. I mentioned that for the data preparation phase, you need domain experts, people who know your suppliers in the Southeast or your distribution channel in the UK, or the kinds of goods and services that you buy in Southeast Asia. And you need them because they have that intellectual asset that is above and beyond what is captured in your systems today. How do we get those people involved in the quality improvement process, and how do we do it without driving them crazy and without having to pull them out of their full-time jobs? A lot of that gets down to how you manage the projects themselves. I think at one of our clients, they had 450,000 SKUs just on the goods that they buy. And they really wanted to sort of boil the ocean and take it all at once and say, oh, we'll assemble a team of 24 people, and this is what we'll do for the next 6 months. And then the headcount budget comes in, and nobody's really willing to make the transition out of their full-time gig. And their operations folks don't want to cut them loose to help you with your particular project. And very quickly, that project sort of dies on the vine. Instead, what you have to sort of take a step back and realize is you don't need them for 6 months. You need certain kinds of people for a few days a week, for a month and a half, and then you can let them loose and they can get back to their real job. You can leverage outside resources like your suppliers or your service providers. You can tap the guys in finance to help you with some of the items. You need to be able to use the appropriate internal resources well, coordinate them effectively, and have them partake of a workflow that is specific and particular to the data that you're trying to improve. And this allows you to have a series of smaller teams be very effective and be very productive without the somewhat huge overhead of making this a broad spectrum corporate initiative. Yes, you need the corporate mandate. Yes, you need the executive sponsorship. But now you have the ability to do this as a series of tiger teams as compared to a massive wave of change. By allowing you to approach your data in manageable chunks and for you to be able to split your data up into pieces that can then be absorbed and processed and handled by the appropriate domain knowledgeable people, you increase your odds of success dramatically. And by being able to leverage this environment into a collaborative user or workflow environment, you can also ensure that you are not going to overtask any particular individual. So the ability to identify people internal or external to your organization, bring them into the workflow, assign them specific tasks in the data quality improvement process, including the reviewer or the person who's responsible for enriching or finding out and researching additional information, enables you to streamline this entire process. And doing it in let's say, a cloud-based or SaaS-based mode allows you to do that very quickly without a lot of stand-up costs or without that kind of permanency that might be otherwise associated with a traditional on-premise environment. So some of the other things that we found were there were sort of things that people didn't like to do. I mean, we found that when it came to research or doing some additional enrichment, people didn't mind that too much. It was interesting and gave them a sense of a little bit more about the business process. But things that they downright disliked were categorization or classification of data, lumping or processing massive amounts of information into a common framework. So sort of to my earlier point, the standardization of sort of a hierarchy organization for your domain data, whether it's material or supplier or whatever. To be able to do this in an automated way frees up a lot of heavy mundane lifting and allows your team members to focus on value-add solutions. So one of the things that we did, of course, was build in this sort of AI-based, artificial intelligence-based categorization and clustering capability that very quickly identifies the nature of the elements inside of the domain. This allows you, in combination with post-processing, to get a very quick jump start even on just the deduplication or rationalization. The second piece of heavy lifting that a machine is just so much better at than a human being is reading through all of these records and taking what is oftentimes unstructured input description, or an input address or an input bill of material, and ripping that apart into class and characteristic level, characteristic value level data, pulling actual attributes or granular elements out of this unstructured information. A machine's going to do it more consistently. It is going to be certainly a lot quicker, and your people are going to be a lot less unhappy if something else does 90% of the work, and they are just going through a review or QA process on it. So by sort of taking away these two sort of heavy lifting components, categorization and attribute extraction, we're finding that project delivery times are being significantly reduced. When I say significantly, reduced by 2/3 to 3/4. And again, it's doing this consistently and doing it across multiple languages. So the ability to pull this information out that is both industry and geography specific really allows this flexibility for extracting attributes and creating this very granular data that everyone wants to have, and it also provides a much stronger measure when it comes to measuring data quality. Right? Again, data quality is not just accuracy, but it's also completeness. And this gives you, in light of the templates and the sort of data dictionaries that you've already defined for your core elements, the ability to measure that very directly. Now, if we look at how to take this and sort of leverage it through a real-world environment, artificial intelligence is a nice approach. It thinks like a person. It looks at data very similar to the way a human being does. But there's still a matter of writing rules and conditions, and how do I force things into particular areas? How do I fix an address, or how do I justify fields within a data element? And how do I do it without having to write a lot of scripts or get down to the ETL level? This is where we've taken, again, just experience and practices from our customers and said, the right thing to do is learn by experience. So we started off by sort of amassing all this information into a common platform, but every customer, everyone says, we're different, and we are, right? Every customer has a different requirement. Every industry is a little bit different. So by leveraging a learn by example environment, this gives you the ability to leverage a platform and effectively train it as you go. So it adopts and learns to your own capabilities and your own patterns. If we look at the first part of this, the data preparation phase, we talk about some of the approaches. We talked about classification, categorization, normalization, and enrichment. This sort of meets that standardize, normalize, attribute, rationalize, and enrich process. And our platform really represents about 300 staff years worth of experience working with some of the world's largest organizations and building that sort of knowledge and best practice directly into the components themselves. Whether it's the ability to simply start up and itemize very small manageable batches that can be taken care of in days or weeks rather than months. Parsing data as it comes into the system so that you can be assured that the mapping is accurate, so that based on an extract we can automatically pull the correct information out of an environment. Providing to you, the users, the ability to identify where your best data is. If I had to go back and think about how customers have the weirdest data in the weirdest place sometimes, but they know where it is. It's just not where everyone else expects it to be, especially in legacy or these tangential systems. The ability to map that information in and leverage that core knowledge of, well, in this particular plant, they always put this information in this field, and I know it's not the right way, but it's the way they've always done it. And to still process that quickly and easily and bring it back into a common, standardized, normalized output environment for loading back into your target master data repository. For you to create your own workflow, your teams, your domain people know who's good for particular categories of goods or services. They know who is best at looking at distributors versus end-user customers. They know their channel, they know their market. You only need them for a little bit of time to improve that data quality. If we can get them into the environment in an as-needed basis and a when-needed basis, you've got the ability to run a very successful project with a much more limited or fixed and finite resource pool. And then leveraging some of the technology, the automatic categorization, bring things into a normal hierarchy so that you can effectively slice your information. And then similarly be able to go through and be able to pull actual attributes against templates and even modify templates as you need to. So the ability to start with a common data template for a particular domain and then make modifications to it on the fly and have these modifications stick and stay forever and just rerun them against any data you might have already processed. It brings a level of consistency and speed and automation that only technology can give you, but incredibly well coupled with your experience and your knowledge and your domain and your team. And it really, I think, for an organization who is either at that level of maturity or is heading down that path, gives you that capability to really drive a very customized solution, leveraging some very general purpose tools, again, that have already been trained with the idea of master data quality improvement in mind, of course. And the ability to run through these environments and to automatically begin to pull attribute data out of your original source information becomes a tremendous enabler in terms of performance gains. And then to be able to go from this particular level of detail to now getting to the point where you want to further enrich or improve your data is just a matter of additional steps. So whether it is a record on a good that I buy or a product that I make or a supplier I do business with, the ability to go that next step and say, okay, I've got information from my source, right, from my original descriptives, from my original material or customer or supplier master. Now I need to go out and further enrich this information. We have a technology called auto-crawl. We'll go out to any electronic readable environment, either external or internal to your organization. Take the key attributes from your source information, target a particular, let's say even something as simple as a website or a catalog or electronic drawing, and pull those missing attributes out to increase the data quality by providing more completeness at all times, giving you and your team the ability to verify and validate where that data is coming from. The next step after this, after you're actually sort of pull this information, is to sort of finally normalize any additional output, split values, things like unit of measure, or let's say a house number from a street address. So if you're looking for that level of very deep granularity, the ability for the software to do that based on rules that are both common and that, again, that have been applied over the years, but also those that might be very industry or task specific. Yeah, because ultimately what you're trying to do now is catch and sort of remove duplicates. Now this happens to be an example on screen of parts, things that people buy. So it could be something as straightforward as a manufacturer name, manufacturer part number. This could also be, let's say, a supplier with a normalized name at a particular address with a particular phone number. Any series of attribute value pairs can be used to determine either exact or near match. So this gets us to sort of that end state. So we've standardized, normalized, attributed, enriched, and then rationalized a particular data domain, all using your skills, your knowledge, your people, and simply taking advantage of some core technology that has been built and deployed for quite a while. The other part of the process that we talked about was the keeping it clean. So once we have a steady state and you've deployed into your common hub environment, we've got a master data environment, you're looking to add, change, etc. Now we start looking at leveraging the same core capabilities, the ability to categorize things that are being added, make sure that you can add them the right way based on what they are, right? Because your fields or data definitions are going to be different, to be able to attribute or pull information out of incoming data, whether it's coming in electronically from a trading partner or whether it's being keyed in by an operator, normalizing things to make sure that they are accurately represented, and enriching data when possible. To be able to do this, we've developed a product called Integrity. It's currently in its 12th release. And Integrity provides the ability to not just create items, but also search for things. We find the number one reason that bad data gets entered into a system is because someone got frustrated because they couldn't find it to begin with. So providing different ways to search or to look up master data, whether it's through a transactional system or direct to a master data environment, is of course domain or data type dependent. And it could be something as straightforward as an ID, keyword, could be categorized based on whether it is a direct or indirect material, or whether this is an end user customer versus a distributor channel partner. The ability to very quickly search based on that taxonomy, right, the hierarchy that we talked about during the standardization phase, or whether you need to go a level deeper. Increasingly, we're finding that people are just sort of getting down to sort of that Google level, and they're typing in a description and letting the software sort of identify what they're looking for. And then we talked about attribution and the value of attribution in master data. This happens to be a material example. Once I get to my sort of cluster or my category, now you can leverage that attribute data and attribute value data to really come down to a much more finite search result. So if I'm looking for a person, place, or thing, right, the ability to be very exact by leveraging domain-specific, and in many cases category or class-specific characteristics or attribute and attribute values allows you to narrow down to find effectively that needle in a haystack. And it's all about having your data formally and fully processed through the stages of standardization, normalization, attribution, and rationalization. In addition to multiple ways to go ahead and search, you also have the sort of occasional need that once you find something, you want to be able to get into the innards and see where that exists, within and among a system. Very few people like to do armchair integration. So once I find something, maybe I want to know more information about it. I can get down to the level. In this case, happens to be a stock item. Tells me where exactly this is, which facility, what location. So the tiebacks, the connections to your operational system can be as tight or as loose as possibly desired. And to bring sort of the story full circle, as we talk about the process of enriching and standardizing and normalizing information, the ability to control how things are being entered, not by being overly onerous on your rules and on your process and your methodologies, but to take your data governance or data stewardship processes and embedding them within an automated solution allow the automation solution to help your users do the right thing. So this is a straightforward example where someone is trying to create something new and they throw a catalog description or they throw in some free text information, and in real time take that, categorize it, figure out what that item is, find the data definition, the data dictionary, the data template for that item, go to the information that was entered, and then extract that and create my highly attributed, very detailed, very structured data. There was no heavy lifting on the user's part. This was done, in real time, in front of their eyes. They now have the chance to go ahead and approve or deny or change or enrich or improve the data. But we've gone so far. I mean, we've got it to the right category. We've gotten the right level of data. We're in a very good place to keep that data clean and to meet your minimum data quality requirements, so that you can maintain a high data quality scorecard. I said earlier, and something that our customers tell us over and over again, when people can't find something, they create a new one because they have somebody angry on the phone, or they've got something that they need to get out the door, they got to buy something. When somebody goes to create something, let's sort of block them if we can. Let's guide them back to a customer record, to a supplier record, to a product record, to a material record, and say, hey, you were trying to create something. Are you absolutely sure that we don't already have one of these that you could use? Are you sure we don't already have this person in the system? Do they really have to create a new user ID? And by doing this through an automated way, we have that level of consistency and speed that drives these kinds of decisions. And for those that do actually have to go ahead and create something new, and again, this ties back to sort of the integration scenarios, it can be as tightly or loosely coupled with the core platform. So this can either redirect or be callable from within an SAP application, or we can sort of pre-fill, and now that we know the domain, we have the attributes, the ability to tag it and provide that sort of front end to the back end environment is a very straightforward exercise to go through. So I've covered really two core pieces of technology. Technology solutions for getting data clean, for the data preparation phase and that part of the process, but also then the ongoing how to keep things clean, kind of side of the process. The reason that we've done this, and the reason that our customers had asked us to do this, really, because we're a customer-oriented organization, was all about leveraging their teams. We use the term force multiplier for both the team and the platform ROI, return on investment. The ability to leverage technology when and where appropriately lets you keep your knowledge in-house, embed your core assets within the process, and make that process repeatable and consistent across your organization. I mean, how does that actually help, or where do we see impacts? It's for the data quality team professionals that are on this session, it's just increased productivity, the ability to go in, cluster, so now instead of looking at 100,000 records, you're looking at 5,000 that are similar. To take 5,000 of them, find a pattern, modify that, and affect 125 records in 6 mouse clicks is a wonderful thing. To be able to manage these distributed teams of domain experts, in the case of the data preparation, on a global basis. You've got multiple sites, multiple languages, multiple experts. To create a virtual project team and to be able to manage and coordinate and collaborate with these folks through a cloud-based provided solution is just a tremendous enabler that allows quicker stand-up or activation of your projects than the actual implementation in terms of categorization or data attribution, data parsing, happening in this domain-specific template arena just gets you to a higher level of accuracy, quality, and completeness much, much quicker. And the fact that this is an automated, context-aware environment keeps sort of the processing rules focused on the data domain. This is not a general-purpose environment. It is focused on the core domains that you're manipulating. So the sort of end result is that you can deliver both higher volume of output and improved data quality than a typical manual process would ever realize. When we look at who's been using these solutions with great effect, they're in many ways very similar to our customers today. They are going through some kind of transformation or change related to either their core ERP or MRP platform. They may be going through a merger and acquisition. Generally, these are companies, though, that have decided for one reason or the other to do the work themselves. Either they are at the level of maturity where they have seen a level of repeatability of the requirement that mandates their investment in assembling either the virtual or the quasi-permanent core team with sort of that octopus leg spread out to pull in resources as they need them. Or there are those organizations that have a much smaller requirement where they're going to sort of boiling the ocean, take it a cup at a time, and they want a self-service in their timeline, at their point in time, at their pace, because they may be either growing through small incremental acquisition, or they're in the process of standing up new facilities or entering new business markets. Either way, this provides sort of a self-paced, self-controlled way to approach data quality improvement. The other are those that have very unique requirements. They are not cookie cutter. They've got unusual goods that they manufacture. They've got unusual security requirements. They've got unusual supply chains. And they've got typically very high compliance requirements or high government reporting requirements that require them to have a seriously non-standard approach to master data quality improvement. Others, of course, are just those that are consistently going through joint ventures. So large organizations that are standing up JVs or partnerships that may have significant asset value that may run for 1, 3, 5, or 7 years and then sort of discontinued. They're constantly in this growth and construction and deconstruction mode. We've seen, though, that they're looking at a throughput increase of almost tenfold. That compared to a manual process, their ability to deliver in 1/10 the time at an incredibly high rate of speed is incredible. And that the automation of this sort of standardization, normalization, and element extraction process alone lets one person significantly improve performance. We had one customer I was talking with last week. In the time that we took to process, I think it was a 30-minute run of the software, had equated to 2 staff weeks and 3 guys or 3 people for their manual process. I mean, it's a pretty significant reduction in time, task, and of course level of effort. And that was start to finish, including their teams looking over the results. So we're able to successfully meet the same level of completeness and quality in a very short, very fixed, finite period of time. So I know we've covered a fair amount. I've seen a number of questions come in. I'm going to take a quick breath. That's what happens when you're from the New York area. And see if there are any questions that we can answer from the audience.
Okay, well, excellent job, Arthur. Thanks very much. We do have a few moments before we get started on Q&A, and you take a breath. Just like to ask the audience to please fill out a feedback form survey that is now appearing on your desktop. To complete this form, just press the Submit Answer button at the bottom of the page, and thanks in advance for filling out this form. Your participation in our survey will allow us to serve you better in the future. And we have a few moments. Arthur, I see a couple of questions here. If you want to, we can take this first one from Jeff.
Sure.
Okay, so Jeff would like to know, what if your company has all of these elements in place now, but most users do not want to use SAP for material searching?
Jeff, a great question. Of course, this is an SAP Insider sponsored event, so we have to be careful about what we say. I think that maybe paraphrase Jeff's question. If that organization has already determined, okay, classification, they've got attributes, they've got good, clean master data, but if they're looking at that keep it clean phase where the organization itself doesn't want to go back into SAP, I think what he's asking is, are there other ways to search SAP, in this case the material master, for records or entries? Jeff, the short answer to that is yes. Our integrity solution allows that as part of the search environment, and then it does integrate into an SAP environment to allow things like stock extension or actual stock requests to occur. I think increasingly we're seeing that the SAP footprint for those clients who are using class and characteristics are starting to get that level of detailed data. For those who have not made that jump yet, that is one of the things that both our harmonized sort of get it clean process, and then integrity, our data governance process, really does a great job of doing, is providing that kind of insight into and out of an SAP environment.
Okay, here's another question for you. We have multiple ERP systems like Oracle, Bain, J.D. Edwards. How could we segregate data and normalize our database? Most of them are OEM parts.
Oh, wow. I'm not quite sure because, Steve, when you read that, and I'm looking at the question online now, it says segregate data. I think it's interesting because the segregate data is the interesting part. So many times when we think about master data improvement, we think about integrating data and coming up with a common view. Oftentimes, though, segregating data is the sensible thing to do. And it's part of what we talked about when we said identifying batches and taking things and sort of boiling the ocean, sort of slicing them out and sort of setting your taxonomy or your categorization. So to this particular person who's asked the question, one of the first things you need to do in that particular environment is cluster or classify your data so that you've got your OEM data separate from those things that are common, let's say, materials that you're buying, standard MRO versus your finished parts versus your raw material, and realize that with the OEM data, there's limited information that you're going to be able to get other than working with your trusted partners, your OEM providers, to enrich your data. And this is something that we see from both the batching of data, separating out what kind of data types you have. So you segregate your OEM data separately from your stock, let's say MRO, and you use different teams of people to help you improve your data quality. So for your MRO items, you'll use your internal plant engineers, your domain experts, your buyers. For your finished goods, you'll use your engineers and your product management people. For raw, you've got core commodity relationship guys. But for your OEM data, your expertise is going to come from the OEMs themselves. So my recommendation is tie up with the SRM guy, the supplier relationship management person for the OEM, and express to them that it's not that you want to get this additional attribution so that you can squeeze them on a future negotiation. It's that you want to strengthen your partnership. And I've got, off the top of my head, I can think of 3 immediate customers today who were able to partner with their OEMs to bring in OEM-specific attribute data so they could better manage their overall supply chain logistics. It was good for the partner, it was good for the OEM, but also good for their own team. So an immediate recommendation, segregate through common classification. So classification separated with manufacturer part number will help you break out your OEM separately, and then use that as a separate batch and treat that batch separately and embrace your partner. I think it'll make a huge difference.
Okay, thanks, Arthur. I think we can squeeze in one last closing question. So perhaps, could you give us a little bit more detail on where the ORI would come from?
Oh, where the ROI would come from?
Yes.
No, fair enough. Where does the return on investment come from? It comes from really 2 places. One is getting more value out of the team itself. And I don't mean to make that sound very Machiavellian, like we're squeezing people. It's simply using people the right way. So your core team can be a little smaller. Your broader support team could certainly be larger, but your ability to impact more data and improve the granularity to some degree, but also this attribute percentage fill makes your data that much more actionable. So just from, let's say, material-wise, sourcing, procurement, MRO, plant maintenance, supplier, we're looking at supplier leverage, supplier reduction, accurate customer count, better customer satisfaction, lack of duplicates. These are things that have direct monetizable value. In terms of being able to also leverage the ROI from your core platform investments, it makes those platforms, it makes PMO that much more effective. It makes SRM that much more effective because now the information is more actionable and it's actionable quicker. Do we have time for one more, or is that it, Steve? Is there another close question? We can try to
squeeze in that last one about self-service. But what if we don't have the resources in-house? How have other companies tackled that?
Oh, this is a great question. One of the things that we've seen increasingly is sort of a hybrid solution. Organizations who have unique data have unique needs, and they've got that unique internal expertise. And certainly, we've demonstrated how there are tools out there like ours that can certainly support that requirement. When there are common things or things that can be sort of garnered from the marketplace, companies, including ourselves, are happy to engage, use the same platform, and leverage your external providers like Verdantis to provide this additional level of data processing and master data cleansing to help you overall be successful.
Okay, very good. Well, we do have a few more questions, but unfortunately that's all for our live session. So Arthur and his team will follow up with you at a later date. We want to thank you all for attending today's webinar, Advanced Self-Service Master Data Improvement, hosted by SAP Insider and presented by Verdantis, Inc. Shortly after this live event, we'll send you an email reminder to access this presentation on demand. And on behalf of our guest, Arthur Regett, Executive Vice President of Verdantis, I want to thank you for your time and have a good day.